Hey, thanks for tuning into the Building Blocks podcast. I'm your host, Eden Chai. And on today's episode, I'm super excited to interview Sara Graham, who most recently was an SVP of marketing at Beacon Communities, a very well-known property management company. And she's since, in the last 3 months, left to start her own firm called Six Dots Consulting. Now, the reason I'm so excited to interview her is she has over 20 years of experience in multifamily marketing, working at different types of PMCs and companies, making different kinds of hires, working on different kinds of tech stacks. So she's one of the most knowledgeable people in the space. And we're covering a pretty hot topic, which is how important is multifamily experience? You've seen the job listings before, 3 to 5 years multifamily experience required. But are we shooting ourselves in the foot here by making the talent pool so narrow? Sara has some interesting opinions, which I'm excited for you to hear. She's actually never worked on site before, and she has this 20-year career and made hires in and outside of the industry. So she has some cool stories that I'm excited for you to tune into about hires that did work out, that didn't work out, and maybe the situation that your company in isn't the greatest factor to consider when deciding whether to require multifamily experience or not. Maybe it's a little bit more about the kind of person that you can find. Tune into this episode to learn a little bit more and let me know what you think. Sara, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
This is a really, really interesting topic to me because ever since I entered multifamily 5 or 6 years ago, I wasn't really sure why the industry standard is the way it is. Like, why is there this insane focus on hiring from within multifamily? Obviously, I'm considered an outsider, right? Like, my business partner pulled me in because he was working in house and he said, we have to get into this industry. And it happened organically. But I'm curious, I'd love to kick it off and just dive into why is the industry standard put so much emphasis on hiring with multifamily experience? Like, I've spoken to a few people that I've introduced you to as well, that are so intent on making sure, like, no, they need to have worked at a similar company to ours in the same role for me to hire them.
It's a really good question. And I think there's sort of two schools of thought around all of this, right? There's certainly value in hiring from within the industry in certain cases. However, I think there's a lot to be said for fresh perspectives too. And sort of in my mind, having been in the industry for 20 something years, the closer you work to the on-site teams, the more valuable that multifamily experience is upfront. However, I think if you are in a strategic role or a creative role, there's more room to experiment with outside experience. And I think of retail, I think of hospitality, consumer packaged goods, believe it or not. I think, for people who are working in different types of roles where you're talking about the customer experience, you're talking about messaging, you're talking about positioning, you're talking about multi-location strategy. There's a lot to be said for experience from outside. But I have a lot of really strong feelings about this, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. I think the size of the company matters. I think the size of the team matters. I think the quality of onboarding matters. So this might be a really long conversation.
We might have to cut it off at some point. But I know you and I agree on so many benefits of a fresh perspective, but what are people scared of, right? The people that you consult with at Six Dots who are asking you, I need to make this new hire. What are they scared of if they're going to hire someone from CPG or another multi-location marketer who didn't work in multifamily? Maybe they were managing, I don't know, some other retail business like Domino's, right? Like pizza. So what are they scared of hiring these people from outside the industry that they're so fearful they're not going to be able to make up this knowledge gap? I'm asking, like, you probably know better than I do. I'm not really sure what they're scared of because I would just lean into it.
Sure. So I think the tech stack is really complicated in multifamily, and that is a lot to wrap your brain around if you are working in a corporate-based role, whether you're in marketing or customer experience. Again, if you are thinking about sort of what the on-site teams are experiencing, and if you are working really closely with the on-site teams, I've worked in some companies where the on-site teams have 8, 10, 12 applications open at once. And if you've never heard any of those names, It sounds kind of like alphabet soup, honestly. We have acronyms, we have our whole vernacular that is truly unique to multifamily. And I know lots of other industries are that way too, but it presents a bigger learning curve. And I think for smaller teams that don't maybe have a lot of bandwidth to devote to multifamily 101, it can be quote unquote safer to bring someone in who already has that baseline knowledge. But here's the thing. Um, I am living proof that multifamily can be learned. The fun fact of the day and of our podcast is that I've never worked on site. And yet I have worked with hundreds of on site teams in my decades in the industry. And so I think if you have the time, the energy, the passion to devote, and a sort of a company structure and culture that allows for you to really take a little bit of time to immerse yourself and to really get your boots on the ground and meet with the on site teams, that gives back in spades. And one of the things that I can do now that I'm a fractional executive and advisor, is actually take what I know about multifamily and help coach up or mentor tomorrow's leaders. There are lots of really talented people coming into our space that maybe don't have multifamily experience but are adjacent. And so they've already got the marketing experience, maybe from another space, and again, have great vision for what a team might look like. But they just need some help understanding the nuanced landscape that's multifamily. Tech is one piece. I think understanding what the teams are trying to wrap their brains around with all of the different tools. Some of them integrate better than others. That's another big piece. And I think the speed at which we are all trying to adapt to new ways of working with AI, role specialization or centralization, there's a lot there. And again, if you've got the baseline, you can probably connect dots faster, but it doesn't have to be super complicated. And I think there's a lot to be said for that outside perspective, again, because you've got exposure to things that maybe sometimes we are short sighted on. For those of us that have grown up in multifamily, we just don't get exposed to enough diversity of thought. And so I think there's a lot to be said for someone coming in. Again, culture, training, onboarding play a huge role on how fast someone can hit the ground running.
I just had a conversation with somebody who was hired from outside the industry, and they're
Mm-hmm.
working at a pretty sizable third-party PMC now. And he was telling me his experience of getting onboarded and just
Yeah.
learning about how everything that you just spoke about, how does the tech stack work? What do the on-site teams use? What kind of challenges they face?
Yes.
And he said that he was flabbergasted. He said, like, this is nothing like, and he was a multi-location marketer before.
Yeah.
And he said, I would assume we're using some of the same tools. Like multi-location marketing tends to gravitate towards similar tools. And he said, no, I had to learn a whole new tech stack. And said, wait, we can't do this with our CRM, but we can do this with another tool. And we kind of package them together.
Yes.
And I would say the reason that I encourage people to lean into it so much is because a lot of those new marketers from other industries are not willing to accept some of the challenges that we have. And that is the best breeding ground to fix them and to find new solutions. And I love how they challenge the status quo so strongly that
Yes.
sometimes they're like, I'm not even willing to accept this. I will find another way. Trust me, I will go figure this out because I'm not going to run with the limitations that we have right here. I'm not willing to do it. Like, I need to set myself up for greater success, and I'm willing to do more work to make it happen. So that's the thing that I love the most. But if I'm understanding what you said correctly, the differences in tech stack is a really big deal, which I think I've minimized because I was speaking to a friend of mine who runs marketing for Home Depot,
Mm-hmm.
and they use a lot of the tech stack that I use, just like marketing flair, right? Like
Yeah.
email marketing, a lot of similar tech stack. And then I realized when you look at all these other industries outside of multifamily, let's say you're talking about Home Depot, like other multi-location marketing, a lot of there's going to be tons of overlap. So if you're moving between those industries, you're running similar concepts, potentially on
Mm-hmm.
similar tech stacks, that it's like the same 5 tools that everyone gravitates towards. But then when you get to multifamily, it's like, no, tear all of that down. We have a complete custom tech stack. It's like, oh, use that for email marketing. It's like, no, we have direct integration partners that we use with our PMS and so tearing that all down is a big hurdle. And if, we tend to be pretty strapped for bandwidth in this industry. It's a difficult job. So I understand why you wouldn't hire somebody who needs more ramp up when you need them to help you, right? Like, you're hiring them to help you. And for you to do extra work to get to a point where they can help you in 3 months, I can understand why that would deter you, right? I'm sure maybe you've even been in those kinds of situations before, no?
Yeah, I mean, I have built and rebuilt multiple teams. I've been a team of one. So I know what it's like to be kind of thrown into the deep end where you truly it's sink or swim in some cases, and you are just challenged to try and figure that out. Um, I think bigger companies maybe have more room to experiment, I'll call it that, with bringing people from the outside in, just because there's more resources to go around, right? You've got probably a bigger team that can rally around the new person to say, okay, here are the things that we do, and here's what we use for X and Y and Z. But I think there's, no matter how big your team is and how big your company is, the onboarding piece is critical. In my past roles, what I've done as a manager to set my team up for success, you there's so much that goes into that. When I've onboarded into new teams myself, I've been incredibly thankful for managers who recognize the value in saying, go talk with IT, go talk with learning and development, go spend time with the regional managers, and go on a listening tour to the on-site teams and really understand the inner workings of all of that. So I think there's value in that, whether you have spent your entire career in multifamily or whether you are brand new to the industry, because every company does something a little bit different. The tech stack is not the same from, shop A to shop B. Different companies think about staffing in different ways. So the resources matter. The onboarding matters, and the tech stack matters. But I think there's something even outside of that. And it sounds really simple, but it's sort of this like entrepreneurial thinking and growth mindset. You don't know what you don't know. And I think one of the things that I have found always in our space is, even after decades, is that things continue to change. You have to adapt. And if you can't, then multifamily is probably not a place where you are going to succeed. I've never had an experience where a team member has, thrown their heads in the air and said, "I'm out. I don't want to learn this stack." There's so much to it, and I think for most people, they find that challenge exciting and find a lot of opportunity in it. But there is a lot to wrap your brain around, and to your point, it's not easy, and the size of the company matters, the onboarding matters, all of those resource allocations really matter.
So I'm glad you brought up being a one person team
Yeah.
versus hiring and having, let's say, a team of three to rally around a new person. How does that change how much you would tell someone to lean into hiring someone without industry experience versus with? Because I'm sure, I'm just assuming, if you're a one person team, you have way less patience and bandwidth to be like, oh, I'm going to sit with you for 12 hours a day and I'm going to teach you everything. It's like, no, I need to run marketing for an entire shop while
Mhm.
I get you onboarded. So, what are the situations in which you would tell someone to lean in or away from hiring with that experience?
So I have almost always worked in mid-sized management companies in the 10 to 25,000 unit range. And I have been a team of one, a team, me, myself, and I'm the team,
Yeah.
multiple times. And so, a funny thing, I was thinking about, our conversation this morning, and I remembered early in my career, I was working for a management company, and there was a really high profile lease up. And I was asked to go set up a leasing office. I'd never done that. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know what was supposed to be in the leasing office. And I had industry experience. I had worked in real estate. I worked for a real estate services company. I worked for a commercial mortgage company where multifamily companies were the clients. I'd had lots of exposure to real estate and development, but had never worked for a management company, until that point in my career, and had never been a team of one. I had worked with small teams and in small teams. And so I did what I think a lot of people would do in that situation. I asked a lot of questions. I surrounded myself with people who I knew were looking for success just as much as I was. And I found out who trusted supplier partners were that could help me figure out how to make it a success. And so I think there's, back to the whole growth mindset and asking a lot of questions. There's something to be said too for this entrepreneurial mindset where you just get the job done. And if you stumble a little bit, that's okay. And so as I've grown throughout my career and have had the opportunity to hire teams and mentor teams, that's one of the big things I personally look for. And I think a lot of people in our space look for is this ability to be resourceful and to ask good questions, or just ask a lot of questions in the beginning to really say, okay, what is this and what are we shooting for and what does success look like? And if you can take a half step back and say, okay, I've got enough building blocks here to figure out what I need to do. I'm going to attempt to pull things together and ask for feedback along the way. I think that goes a long way. And so it may not be, what makes it a success or what doesn't make it a success. It's hard to think about that in the abstract sometimes as you're thinking about, is this candidate going to be a good fit for my team? But I think as hiring managers and as leaders, when we know our culture really well and we know the types of people that will contribute to that, and you can sort of think about where the opportunities are and bring in the creative thinker who is really willing to roll up their sleeves, that in my mind is a recipe for success.
I think you just flipped this question on its head, which I love because I didn't even think about that. I keep thinking about what situation is the company in, right? Let's say it's a mid-sized management company, team of one, no time to train someone. Okay, maybe just hire somebody with multifamily experience. Or bigger company, you have a team to rally around. Maybe you can hire outside. But you're flipping the question on its head because what if that wasn't your biggest consideration? What if the consideration is the kind of candidates that you're capable of attracting and how much of a
Yes.
self-starter they are, how much they can find problems and solutions on their own without asking your team for so much help? How do they think about all your whole tech stack creatively? How do they easily understand why your company made certain decisions, easily understand your customer without a lot of handholding? I think that's a very good way to go about it because
Yeah.
you can say, listen, I'll hire within the industry if I find A, B, and C person. But if I find somebody without the industry, outside of the industry, and they have these kinds of traits that fit in with our culture, that can get them ramped up very quickly, and it will pay off, then I'm going to hire that person. I love you just flipped it. Maybe it's not so much about your situation, but what kind of talent you can bring into the door and whether they're going to be able to make this work.
Yeah, I think for me, that's been a big piece of how I've thought about building teams. And I think the companies that I've worked for have largely thought in that way too. And I think as we move through our careers and grow as leaders, we pick up things along the way and you sort of adapt them and you mold them into your own framework as you think about, okay, here's how I want to hire a team. But I would say too, there's, um, I think, a lot of value in switching up how we think about building teams, and every company is different. So again, where you've got maybe a one person team, you've got a 3-person team, you've got a 10 or 12-person team. If you move to a much bigger management company, their entire team's devoted to just digital marketing or just customer experience and just marketing technology. So I think there's frameworks that can be developed as we move through and lead and manage different size teams and have the opportunity to hire different kinds of people and marketers in my case, because I'm a marketer by trade, right? So in my brain always goes to, what should this marketing team look like? What do we need? And what do we need is not just the team, but the company at large. And so thinking about how all of that fits together and, maybe the on-site teams really need a lot of support. Some of my very best hires have worked on site, not just as marketers, it's sort of at the corporate level as a marketing manager or director, but have actually sat in the seat and answered the phones. And they've been leasing consultants, they've been property managers, and they are able to gracefully make the leap from that operator side, the actual leasing of the apartments, that frontline work that is so incredibly important. Again, if they don't I've said this a couple of times, I feel like, in various conversations recently, but I'll say it again. If the on-site teams aren't leasing, the rest of us really don't have a lot of work to do at any place in the company. And so I think for people who can gracefully make that leap from the on-site team through to a corporate marketing role, they've sat in the seat, they have answered the phone, they know firsthand how complicated sometimes the tech stack can be, and they know what the customer experience can and should feel like. So they bring incredible perspective to helping inform some of the conversations that are happening at a corporate level. And you combine that with people who maybe have come from outside the industry and bring a totally different perspective. And I think that's where the magic can happen.
So why is it the status quo? And maybe you just said why it is, but why is it the status quo that one of the most common paths to multifamily marketing is going from on-site and getting promoted to, let's say, marketing manager and moving up from there? Why do you think that is the most common path?
So I will say not everyone that is a leasing consultant should be a marketing manager. Some people are born sellers and they should be doing that role forever because they're so incredible at it. And it would be a disservice to pull them out of something that is their wheelhouse and their superpower. But I think there are some sort of predetermined or sort of legacy career tracks, maybe is a better way to say that, where, I mean, sort of the old school thought is you go from leasing consultant to assistant manager to property manager. And that sometimes works, but sometimes it doesn't, because what a leasing consultant does is so different from what an assistant property manager does, where you're focusing on collections and, there's a whole slew of different skill sets. So that's one career track. Another, as you said, is someone goes from on-site to maybe a marketing role. I wouldn't limit that to just marketing. I mean, in some of the management companies I've worked with and for, people are coming from on site and moving into IT, or they're moving into accounting, or they're moving into something completely different, asset management, whatever it may be. I think that's pretty typical for a lot of management companies because companies like to be able to promote from within. And I think that is a cultural norm within our industry and within our space, where that offers a lot of people a lot of opportunity. And a lot of the companies I've worked for have people who have truly grown up within the company. They have spent 15, 20, 35, 40 years within one company. That's incredible. I mean, I don't know a lot of industries anymore where that necessarily is a thing. And I think it says a lot about multifamily that we see potential in people to do that. Instead of having incredibly talented people who spend a few years with us and then bounce out. Are there people who do that? Absolutely.
There always will be.
And I mean, but they're also boomerangs, and they leave and they come back. Maybe not to the same management company, but they say that, hey, there's really something kind of wonderful, quirky, but wonderful about multifamily, and people come back. And so many people stay in the industry. So it might be a legacy thing or sort of an old school way of thinking where, yeah, we hire people who have worked on site, but I think they understand the customer experience and, again, what that should feel like. They know the tech stack, and it becomes sort of a natural transition point. And again, a way for people to stay with companies that they love.
Yeah. So their strength is definitely being able to give all their data context so that if you
Yes.
promote someone from within, they move off site and now they're looking at a lot of numbers and they're not
Mhm.
actually seeing where do those numbers happen in real life. So if you're coming straight from on site, you see, oh, this number is this way because this is what the leasing office looks like. This is what the customer experience looks like. These are the factors that are influencing this property, which is a massive skill and very difficult to replicate. So I can understand that. You
Yeah,
mentioned
and I
that.
would say,
Yeah.
sorry, I would say too, you raise a really good point. A lot of marketing managers work on a portfolio basis. So they are saying, okay, I know what I knew about my singular property, but now I can take that, foundation and say, well, now I oversee 30, 40, however many properties are in my portfolio, and really be able to glean a much larger understanding. And they do have the insight of, what do those numbers mean? And it is that sort of foundation.
Yeah, I think every marketer's superpower should be to figure out how to give data context. And if you've actually
Yes.
been inside of the context, then you're going to be very good at that. And you're not
Yeah.
going to have to try to piece things together and work as hard as some other people. But you mentioned that some leasing consultants have this natural gift, and it would be a disservice to them to pull them out of that role. Since this is such a common career track, what would be some like red flags or positive indicators for where this person should go and how you should promote them from within? Because I'm sure a lot of people are thinking to themselves, I have this person, they're a star, I want them on my marketing team, I want to get them into that marketing coordinator, manager role, whatever it might be. Based on your experience, what would make you advise someone to lean in or away from that kind of decision?
So I think open conversation yields a lot of insight. Just saying, hey, I've noticed that you're, doing incredible work. What do you want to do? And a lot of people say, I love what I'm doing and I want to keep leasing, but maybe there's an opportunity for less seasoned leasing professionals to shadow that person. Maybe you can get the leasing professional to run some kind of training in partnership with your learning and development team where you're bringing in a subject matter expert. It doesn't have to necessarily be come join my marketing team. I think the sort of definition of success for that is to say, how do we get this person to stay with our company? Ideally. And if they choose not to stay because there's growth opportunity outside, then that's a win for them too. And we should celebrate that personally, I think, because it's important to see people succeed, whether they stay with us or not, of course. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to have people grow with you within the company if you say, here are some things that might line up for you. You could be mentoring newer leasing professionals. You could be doing training work. You could be stepping into a role where maybe you are the person who is dispatched to lease ups to say, okay, we've got a new lease up and we need someone who really knows how the inner workings of that should flow. They already know the tech stack. They can just step in and immediately hit the ground running, and they don't have to think about the intricacies of the what and the how. They just do. So I think there's a lot of opportunity that sort of presents itself there. The other opportunity that I know a lot of companies are looking at is role specialization. And so you could say, okay, maybe you're not just at one property, maybe you are doing something else that is still leasing focused. But for those that are, if we're talking about marketing specifically, to say, how do you know when someone's ready to step off property and really become someone who is a corporate marketer, someone part of the marketing team? One thing that I've seen in the past is those people are raising their hands constantly. There's a marketing committee. Pick me. I want to be on the marketing committee. You want someone to beta test or pilot a new tech platform? Pick me. There's so much opportunity where I know in my past, sort of at this intersection of marketing and tech and operations, where I have relied on-site teams to be thought partners. And there are people who shine because they want to be involved. They want to say, I want to be involved in helping to shape the next phase of innovation in the company. And those individuals often rise to the top of my mind when I'm thinking, okay, it's time to grow my team. Are there people internally that we might want to tap? So again, going back to this comment you made a little while ago about go-getters. There are go-getters in every company. And I think those are some of the people that, in my mind, are more easily and more seamlessly able to make that transition from an on-site team to a corporate team member space.
Yeah, okay, that's super insightful. So it's less so guessing, oh, would this person be good? Would that person be good? And more so noticing the effort that they're putting in and how self-led they are. And they're raising their hands. So you might not have to guess about who to hire. You might just have to look at the people who are already kind of fighting to move forward and to progress and be open-minded and help you solve problems and be involved in all these initiatives, to lean into those people and just give them a better opportunity to thrive as opposed to figuring out who you're going to pull in. That's interesting. I mean, I've never been in that situation.
Hmm.
I've never hired somebody and told them, hey, you're a leasing consultant, like why don't you get promoted or move on to this marketing manager role? But I know that it's a big question because it's such a common track and it doesn't always work out, right? There's pros and there's cons. Some people, like you said, you did a disservice. They had such a bright personality and they were so good at charming people, getting them into the door, building that relationship with them, that they thrived on site and they made every resident and prospect love them. And that was a game changer for that asset. And if you pull them out of that heavy people facing role, then you've actually diminished their strength and you're putting them in a situation where they can't play to their strengths, which is, I guess, as an organization, what you want to be trying to do constantly is how am I going to put every single person in a position to play to their strengths, which is why I love what the decision that you've made to go out and onto Six Dots, because I feel like that's basically the decision that you made for yourself. Maybe that's what you learned in your 20 years is how am I putting everyone in a position of strength? And then, I don't know, is that what happened? Did you just look at yourself and go, I think, being able to provide my expertise to a wider range of people is how I'm going to do that?
Yes, actually. That's almost exactly what happened. And for me, having spent, a couple of decades leading marketing teams, it felt like the right time to enter this next phase where I can keep doing the work that I love, which is this mix or blend of marketing, tech, and operations, but be able to work with more companies, help solve more problems, and make a bigger impact on the industry. So that's exactly why I founded Six Dots. And I can still do a lot of the work that I did and loved in previous roles. One of those things is helping to really think about what should a marketing team or organization look like and how does that add to a company's initiatives and who are the right people in the right seats and how does all of that come together. So now that I'm a fractional executive, I can still do that and bring a pretty different perspective than I would if I were working for just a single management company at a time. So it's been a lot of fun, and I am really enjoying this new phase. It's been a really busy few months since I've launched.
I love that. Yeah, and you still had time to come on the podcast, so I
I
appreciate it.
did, yes. One of the luxuries of being your own boss, you can decide how you want to spend time and who you want to spend it with.
Love it. Well, I'm grateful that you came on. I have one more question, which is just something that has been a challenge for me.
Mm.
I think one of the hardest parts for me about solving a problem for a multifamily business is understanding why the current problem exists, right? So you jump to solve the problem. We're impatient. I want to move forward. Let's go. Let's figure out a solution.
Mm.
But you fail to realize the reason that we're in the current situation is very complex. And I'll give you a quick example from a post that I made last week about tech stacks. Someone messaged me giving me feedback, a pretty high profile COO in our space that most people know. And he said, a lot of these tech stack decisions depend on the kind of company you work for. So he said, if you take on a lot of investors, some big institutional investors will only work with you if you use X property management software.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, people forget that you're talking about cost, bandwidth, integration, benefits. He said, you're not even covering everything with that. There's bigger factors at play. And so my question to you is that a common challenge that you see of people being confused, not knowing why, not taking the extra time to understand why are we in this current situation? Now, with that knowledge, how are we going to solve it? Because that's been a big challenge for me. And I keep trying to get better at it every year. Okay, you have this problem, but let's zoom out for a second. Why? Why are we here right now?
Yeah, I think that a lot of management companies, and I have some third party experience, so I can speak to this a little bit from my own journey through all of this, and having pitched a lot of clients ranging from institutional to regional developers and owners. So management companies that work in the third party space spend a lot of time and effort curating a stack that works for the on-site team, that works to support a really smooth and frictionless resident experience. In my mind, a tech stack is a differentiator where you're able to say, here is what we as a management company have curated for you, the owner, to ensure that your asset performs to the best of its ability. and we will be able to step in on day one and get you up and running and not just meet but exceed your goals. So I know that not every management company necessarily thinks that way, but in my experience, one of the responsibilities of the management company is to provide that turnkey service. And it gets really hard when you have owners that require, to use your word, or mandate that you use certain tech platforms. I will say that I've had clients who have said, we really want you to use fill in the blank, whatever it may be. It wasn't a core property management software request, it was an add-on. And that gave me, as the person who often sat in the seat to test drive new platforms and to think about new strategic initiatives, that gave me and the management company an opportunity to really experiment and actually say, okay, maybe we don't have the best solution for this need. Maybe there's a better way to do it. And so I think if as marketers, we can sort of hold space to say, okay, here's the core or the spine, the stack that is essential, and then there are elements that get added or modified or have optionality. That might be sort of the best of all worlds, where you have a stack that your on-site team knows, that they feel confident in using, that you as a marketer feel confident in the data. For those that work in the operations space, again, understanding that things are what they should be, and you have confidence in that. I mean, I think an organization needs to have confidence in the data no matter what seat you sit in. But you've got the optionality. I think that, in my mind, is maybe the best of all worlds and does give you the room to push the envelope and to think differently, and allows space for those who are coming into our industry from maybe another space to say, hey, I actually happen to know that there's this really cool tool that would solve for this client's needs. I think some flexibility is key, but it's challenging, to say the least, to accommodate a full tech stack change, and, as you said, enormously expensive to the point where it may not be sustainable for a management company to think in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think some leeway is good because you can
Mhm.
grow a lot from it. There are
Yes.
some of our clients who I see catering to their investors so much that I'm actually in shock at how much they'll cater to them, because every every property is a new custom job,
Yeah.
right? And I can't really believe it. So I hope that works out for them. I mean, it's a bit uncommon to be like, yeah, it's totally in your hands. Like whatever you want to do. I feel like usually it's like, no, we have our systems in place and you can play around. I think what you described is a good middle ground. Like you're
Yeah.
right. We haven't fully solved for that problem. Maybe there's an add-on that will help us solve for it 90 to 100%. And right now we're only solving for it 50%. But
Yeah.
I always feel for the marketers on these teams when I see that, it's just a constant revolving door of tech, right? And we're an add-on. Our software is an add-on, so like I totally get it. But I think it's a delicate balance, and maybe the more established property management companies can be a bit more firm with what they say, right, or what they mandate from their customer, to say, listen, you have a little bit of leeway, but only up until this point, right? And maybe newer ones are going to be leaning into that more. Is that what you've found? Like less established are going to lean more into the customer, more established are going to say, no, we're here for a reason.
Yeah. I think, again, I used to do a lot of pitching and a lot of meeting with potential clients. And part of the pitch was, here's the marketing program, here's the platform that we use for this, and here's how all of these things are set up, and here's how it adds to the value that we bring as a management company. It becomes a reason why people choose to work with you. And so I think if it's a less defined situation where clients are just, given true blank slate, choose whatever you want, that becomes confusing. And I think for the on-site teams who are day to day really making all of the magic happen, right? They are the ones who are physically leasing up the assets. They are the ones who are responsible for those front-facing resident relations. If they don't have tools that they know, and if you as a management company aren't able to support those tools, that's where things can get really, really sticky. I mean, I think I know bigger management companies will have a preferred supplier list, and if you are not on the preferred supplier list, then you don't really have an inroad. So I think that's one way to think about it, where you can maybe somewhat limit and say, okay, here are the partners that we already have existing relationships with, and you can pick one of these two property management softwares, and that type of thing. But I think, again, if you're talking mid-sized management companies, I think most have an established stack that they feel really confident in working in. The on-site teams know in and out, the corporate teams know how to support it, and it becomes again sort of that core where there's room to add new things as new needs come up. Again, we've talked about sort of the continued evolution of our space, where there's always something new that's being developed. And I think there's a lot of importance that we need to make sure we're remaining open and nimble to accommodate those things and those changes. But I think it would be really challenging for a management company to work at scale if it was a true open-ended, every client is a custom built.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It sounds like the holy grail is some sort of hybrid with guardrails,
I
right?
think so.
Because there's benefits to having the preferred vendor list, supplier list, and
Yes,
there's also benefits to actually accepting a lot of the input that your investors or ownership groups are telling you, because
for sure.
they're thinking about this asset 24/7. They're the most invested than they're more invested than anybody, and they're going to want to solve every solution to 100%. So I think leaning into both, but with guardrails, is definitely the best way to go about it. And I think it gives you a greater ability to train your team, right? If you're losing the ability to train your team consistently and scale it up, you know, as a startup, every decision we make, I have to think to myself, if our team was 10x the size, would this work?
Mhm.
And if it would break, then we should heavily reconsider what we're doing. And I think that's a great way for third party property management companies to think. And especially when you're talking about your marketing team, you want that team to grow. Maybe you want to grow it into an in-house agency down the line. Ask yourself, if we were 10 times the size, where would this break? And can I solve for that right now before I even make the decision, and not later down the line after we've done something that doesn't scale?
For sure. And it's okay to make changes. Um, you know, I think some of those changes have to be made as companies grow and change and needs change. A lot of companies start out really flat, and that, in my experience, is pretty typical. Where you may have, a one person marketing shop, and you may have, just a handful of people that work on the software side. And as teams grow, and as companies grow, and as portfolios grow, needs are going to change too. And thankfully, we have a lot of really amazing supplier partners and platforms within the company. So there's optionality galore. But it can be a lot to try and navigate through those changes. I think having, an advisory board of peers and colleagues and supplier partners that are really consultative, I think that's one of the things that so many people I know I have rely on continuously, because it helps us think about how to get to the next stage. And there's always this evolution happening. And I think um, that is no way, shape, or form a bad thing. It's actually a really good thing. It keeps pushing all of us to get better.
Awesome. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a great place to wrap it up. So, Sarah, thank you so much for blessing us with your experience and your unique perspectives. I know we agree a lot. I still learned so much just from this conversation about how to approach it. And I genuinely think completely differently. And I'm sure our audience does as well, listening to this, of how do you go about hiring someone with multifamily experience versus without? What decisions should you make moving forward, and all that. So, Sarah, seriously, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great to talk with you, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of Building Blocks. I hope you found some value in the conversation. If you want to get updated every time a new episode drops, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn at Eden Chai, or just head over to our website, getflare.io, and subscribe. You'll see our newsletter there as well. That's all for today. I'll catch you next time.